Everyone else was trying to survive the frozen ocean. I was negotiating with my ice floe. In this world, people starved, froze to death, and disappeared beneath the ice. But while everyone feared the sharks, I discovered something far more terrifying. The ice could talk, the campfire could complain, the seabirds could bargain, even the monsters had voices. At first, it felt like a blessing, until one night, a giant squid crawled out of the darkness and said, "Give me back my child." The problem was, I had already eaten it. The biting, Arctic air clawed at my skin like a physical assault, dragging me from the depths of unconsciousness and into a reality so stark and terrifying that my lungs seized in mid-inhale. As I groggily pried my eyes open, the world blurred, before resolving into a horizon of infinite, unforgiving steel-gray ocean, a vast expanse of frigid water punctuated only by the jagged, white teeth of floating ice. I scrambled to my feet, my boots scraping against the slick, uneven surface of a meager 2-square-meter ice floe. My entire universe in this moment, and a frantic, primal panic bubbled up in my chest as I gasped, "Holy crap, where am I?" My question was met not with an answer, but with a sudden, shimmering distortion in the air as a spectral flash of light erupted, followed by the heavy, damp thud of a fishing net landing at my feet. I stared down at the coarse, salt-crusted fibers, my mind racing to comprehend the holographic prompt that flickered into existence before my eyes. Acquired. Fishing net X1. Use it to catch fish or salvage floating ice blocks. Ice blocks contain survival supplies. The cold realization settled into my bones like lead. I had been torn from my life and thrust into this hostile, alien world, and survival was no longer a theoretical concept, but a desperate, ticking clock. A mechanical, disembodied voice boomed in the silent air, ringing clearly in my ears. "Welcome to the icy survival world. Here, a player's sole objective is to survive. Rule 1. Your ice floe is the foundation of your survival. You can expand and build upon it, but you'll need enough tools and materials. Rule 2. Resources in this world are extremely scarce but highly varied. You'll never guess what's hidden inside the next ice block. This place is far more spectacular and far more dangerous than what you see now. Death in the game means death in reality. Friendly reminder, hungry sharks are prowling. Being targeted by them is extremely dangerous." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of dread, and I instinctively scanned the undulating dark water around my fragile island. My blood ran cold as I saw it, a sleek, lethal silhouette cruising through the water just a few dozen meters away, a predator perfectly evolved for this frozen hellscape. I held my breath, frozen in terror, praying the creature wouldn't turn its dead, glassy eyes toward me, and when it finally veered away into the abyss after a few agonizing circles, I let out a shuddering, shaky breath of relief that felt far too short-lived. A chime echoed, notifying me that the public channel had been unlocked, and with trembling fingers, I swiped open the interface to see a chaotic stream of panicked messages from others like me, all equally lost and terrified. Am I dreaming? How did I wake up in the middle of the ocean? One desperate soul pleaded, while another warned, "It's freezing. Does anyone know what's going on?" The feed was a blur of frantic advice, with some players shouting about salvaging wood to start fires before the night brought even more lethal temperatures, and as I navigated through the tabs, trade, crafting, and the frantic chatter, the pieces of this deadly puzzle began to align. I ignored the bartering for scraps of food and fresh water, focusing my trembling energy on the crafting menu. The cold was an enemy I could feel deepening, leeching the heat from my very soul, and I knew that if I didn't secure a way to generate warmth, the night would be my end. The recipe for a campfire sat there, mocking me with its simplicity: 3 pieces of wood and 1 bundle of grass. I looked out over the glassy, dark swells, my eyes locking onto a cluster of ice blocks drifting slowly toward me, and a determined, hard-edged focus took root in my mind. I would not let this icy grave be my final destination, and as I readied my net to reclaim my life from the waves, I knew that whatever lay inside those blocks, I would seize it, for I was done being a victim of this sea. A sudden, biting gust of wind had me rubbing my palms together in a desperate attempt to fend off the encroaching numbness. My eyes locked on the drifting cluster of ice blocks, when a terrifying, crimson error message materialized in my field of vision, like a glitch in reality itself. Error. My pulse spiked, a cold sweat breaking out across my brow as I stammered, "What the hell?" But before I could process the panic, a sequence of text flickered rapidly. Host detected facing apocalyptic threat. System loading. System encountered game firewall attack. System successfully breached firewall. My breath caught in my throat, a surge of wild, reckless hope replacing my fear. "Wait, do I have a cheat code too?" I whispered, my heart hammering with the thrill of a power fantasy, waiting for a grand interface or a stat screen to define my new existence. But then, as abruptly as it had manifested, the voice vanished, leaving me in an oppressive, ringing silence, my body feeling just as vulnerable and cold as it had seconds before. The ominous reality of my isolation crashed back down on me. Did the system just mutually destruct with the firewall? I muttered, the weight of the absurdity forcing me to plop down onto the hard, frozen surface of my tiny raft in defeat, only to yelp as a sharp, jarring sensation pulsed through my tailbone. Ouch, my head. The cry was shrill, impossibly close, and undeniably human in its tone, emanating from directly beneath me. Before my mind could even attempt to reconcile this impossibility, a cacophonous, frantic chorus erupted in my ears, a cacophony of voices screaming, "Pull me, pull me, pull me," as if I were standing in the middle of a rowdy marketplace rather than the middle of a frozen, silent death trap. I stared at the swaying ice in bewilderment, the realization dawning on me with a shiver that traced my spine. The ice blocks, the very foundations of this nightmare, were speaking. "No way," I breathed, my pragmatism battling with the sheer insanity of the moment. Yet, as the ice surged closer, the voices grew deafeningly specific, shifting from general cries to opportunistic bargains. "Catch me. I have wood. I have wood. I have mud. Mud. I have cans. Pork rib cans." My eyes widened at the thought of actual, tangible food pork ribs, a concept so foreign in this white wasteland that it made my mouth water instantly. Ignoring the mounting anxiety, I snatched up my fishing net, my focus narrowing into a singular predatory intent as I scanned the drift for the source of that glorious, meaty promise. I swung the net with practiced precision, the weighted edges whistling through the frigid air, and snagged the specific block with an ease that felt almost surreal. Yay! Yay! I got caught. The block shrieked in delight as I hauled it onto the small, 2-square-meter raft, and with a swift, brutal stomp, I shattered the frozen prison. Crack. Ouch. You hit my head again. The voice beneath me wailed, and I froze, the realization sinking in that the very floor beneath my boots was a sentient, complaining entity. But there was no time for existential crises. I knelt, my fingers brushing against the cold, metallic surface of a can pulled from the debris. It was real. The power was real. My grin widened, shifting from disbelief to a calculated, shark-like hunger for more. I turned my attention back to the water, where the chorus continued its desperate pleas for harvest, and I became a whirlwind of efficient motion, selectively fishing for the most valuable resources. "I have wood. I have wood. Saved you. I have grass. I have grass. Gotcha. I have fish. I have." The word fish hit my ears like a siren song, and I lunged toward a massive, imposing slab of ice, nearly 4 times the size of its neighbors. I channeled every ounce of my strength into the throw, the muscles in my back straining, and the net settled perfectly over the prize. As I hauled it in, the block actually cheered me on. "Come on, you can do it. Keep going." A bizarre, supportive intimacy that I pushed aside in favor of the result. When the block thudded onto the raft, the floor beneath me groaned. "That's too much, man." But I was already ignoring the grumbling of my base, my eyes fixed on the next glimmer of opportunity. "I have ice. I have ice," one block offered, which I dismissed with a scoff. If it was just ice, it was empty, and I had no time for trash. But then a new, frantic voice cut through the noise. "I have a blueprint. I have a blueprint." My pulse surged. A blueprint meant progress, a future, and a way to conquer this sea. I snatched it from the waves, the cold biting at my fingers, and smashed the ice block with a single, decisive punch. A shimmering, blue interface materialized as the shards fell away. Acquired, crushed ice X2, igloo blueprint X1, blueprint added to crafting menu. Unused blueprints can be sold. I stared at the notification, my heart soaring with the confirmation that I held the keys to my own survival. Yet the urgency of the moment didn't subside. The patch of ice was drifting away into the mist, and I knew that if I wanted to dominate this frozen world, I had to move faster, be sharper, and listen closer to the secrets the ice was so desperately shouting at me. I moved with a rhythmic, desperate efficiency, my arms aching as I hauled in a few final ice blocks from the thinning patch. But as the remaining clusters drifted inexorably into the distance, a wave of disappointment washed over me. To my absolute bewilderment, the ice blocks themselves seemed to mirror my mood, their collective, crystalline voices rising in a pathetic, mournful chorus of, "No more chances. No more chances." So disappointed, disappointed. I cast my gaze across the horizon, squinting through the biting salt spray, and realized that another patch would inevitably cross my path. Armed with my bizarre, game-breaking ability to eavesdrop on the very environment, I could prioritize my needs, turning this icy purgatory into a calculated harvest. My internal planning was cut short by a frantic, high-pitched plea from beneath my feet. "Ouch, it's too heavy, I'm sinking." I looked down, my heart lurching as I realized the ice floe beneath me had indeed lost its buoyancy, dipping dangerously low until the freezing black water began to lap at the surface of my tiny, 2-square-meter sanctuary. The weight of my spoils was literally dragging me to a watery grave, and the voice, my original, coward of an ice floe, screeched with unadulterated terror. "Hurry up and break down the ice blocks to expand me. If you don't hurry, I'm gonna crack. Don't forget to craft a small wooden hammer first." I didn't hesitate. I followed its shrill instructions, grasping a block and focusing my will until it yielded into raw materials. Acquired, crushed ice X2, wood X1. "Oh, this is way too convenient," I muttered, a smirk touching my lips as I repeated the process, gathering bundles of grass and even a sealed seafood can that promised a rare moment of luxury. With a pile of materials growing, I crafted a small wooden hammer. But just as I steeled myself to begin the expansion, a renewed, panicked wail erupted from the base of my raft. "Help! I'm cracking." My brow furrowed. I had barely begun, and already the dramatic complaining had reached a fever pitch. I had successfully transmigrated into this brutal, cutthroat survival game, Yet my primary companion was a gluttonous, lazy slab of ice that possessed all the fortitude of a wet paper bag. As I prepared to act, a fresh, piercing shriek cut through the air. "Help! There are fish biting me. I'm gonna crack." I spun around, clutching my net like a weapon, my pulse racing with adrenaline. "What? How big are the fish to make you crack? Where are they?" I demanded, scanning the dark, swirling depths until the voice hissed. "Hurry up, kid. They're right behind you." I crawled to the edge, my heart in my throat, only to find myself utterly speechless. There, nibbling at the side of my raft, were a few pathetic, palm-sized little fish. "They're just a few palm-sized little fish," I barked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "How could they possibly bite you until you crack?" I scooped them up regardless acquired, small sea fish X3, to which the ice floe whimpered. "Oh, thank goodness you were fast, kid. Otherwise, I would have been chewed to pieces." I rolled my eyes, feeling a profound sense of exasperation. This sentient piece of real estate was dangerously unreliable, yet my own life was tethered to its durability. I decided to prioritize expansion, spending my hard-earned crushed ice to bolster my footing. Ice flow requires crushed ice X10. Description: a 1 square meter ice flow, average durability, weak to heat. With 20 pieces of ice at my disposal, I chose to expand, and with a focused thought, the frost surged, knitting together to form a 3x2 rectangle. "Kid, why did you only build 2 blocks? The floor nagged instantly, and I scoffed. "I'd love to build more, but I need the crushed ice for it." When it retorted with a demanding order to keep fishing, I laughed out of pure, cynical annoyance. I was the player here, not the indentured servant of a coward. Ignoring its grumbles, I turned to the task of warmth, selecting the recipe for a campfire from my menu. Campfire requires wood X3, grass bundle X1. Craft. The structure shimmered into existence, and as a comforting, flickering heat began to radiate outward, the ice floe beneath me unleashed a hysterical, theatrical scream. "Help! I'm on fire." I groaned, dropping my head into my hands. "Stop yelling, will you? It's barely melting a tiny bit. It doesn't affect you at all." The flow shot back. "How would you like being roasted over a fire?" "I'm literally warming myself by it right now," I retorted, though I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of amusement at the sheer absurdity of arguing with the ground I stood on. As I monitored the public channel, scanning the desperate, frantic, and entirely silent to the world pleas of other players who seemed completely unaware that the very world around them was chattering, I realized with a grim, satisfying clarity that I was the only one playing this game with the volume turned up, and that advantage would be the difference between freezing in the dark and ruling this frozen sea. The sheer strategic brilliance of my situation hit me with the force of a tidal wave. While the rest of the panicked masses were scrounging for the barest essentials, I was already manipulating the market like a seasoned merchant in a back-alley bazaar. They saw crushed ice as little more than frozen debris, but I knew its true worth, and as I posted my trade offer small sea fish for crushed ice in the public channel, the reaction was immediate and chaotic, a wildfire of confusion and desperation spreading through the player base. The chat feed scrolled so fast it was a blur of disbelief and greed. Am I seeing things? Someone is trading food for crushed ice, followed quickly by crushed ice, must have some hidden use, and the inevitable, high-stakes bidding war that followed. I watched the numbers tick upward, my calm, practiced composure holding steady as I waited for the peak, my inner shark grinning at the mounting desperation of the starving players. Then, a private notification pinged an offer from a player named Zhu Daiyu. "Bro, sell it to me. I'll give you 60 crushed ice." My curiosity piqued. I couldn't help but ask how he gathered such a windfall, only to learn he had recklessly hacked apart 2 square meters of his own living space just for a single meal. The sheer, hilarious insanity of his gamble earned my respect and the trade. Trade successful. Acquired, crushed ice, X60. Yet, as I piled the frozen bounty onto my raft, the campfire beside me erupted in a high-pitched, indignant wail. "Ah, don't put the crushed ice near me. My fire is going out." I blinked, frozen in shock, the campfire too. It was alive and just as cantankerous as the cowardly, alcohol-loving ice floe beneath me. I hurriedly diverted the crushed ice toward expanding my territory, the materials vanishing into the floorboards as the ice expanded into a respectable 3x4-meter rectangle. I paced my new, sprawling domain with a satisfied, measured stride, though the bickering between my inanimate companions was already reaching a fever pitch. As I settled in to heat a tin of food, the campfire shrieked, "Can't you toss a piece of wood in before you start cooking? I'm about to go out," while the ice floe beneath me roared back. "What? More wood? If you want to roast me alive, just say it." Ignoring their petty squabble, I threw a piece of wood into the flames. The ice floe shrieked like a pig being led to slaughter, while the fire roared in a triumphant, crackling laugh. I tuned them out, opening my crafting menu to see if I could elevate my culinary game, and there it was, a simple grill. It required 4 pieces of metal and 2 of iron wire, and though I was currently 5 pieces of metal short, my confidence was absolute. I looked toward the horizon, where a new, promising cluster of ice blocks was drifting into range, their voices already audible as a chaotic, overlapping chorus of information. I reached for my fishing net, my muscles coiled and ready, but my preparation was violently interrupted by a guttural, terrifying scream from the ice floe. "Oh no! A shark! Underneath! It's right under me!" A sickening, dull thud, reverberated through the very core of my raft, the entire structure jolting with such force that I slammed my body low to the ice, instinctively grounding my center of gravity to keep from being tossed into the freezing abyss. The creature, a massive, predatory shadow, rammed my home again and again, trying to splinter the foundation, but the expansion I had just completed saved my life. Unable to shatter the reinforced surface, the predator finally swerved away, leaving me to catch my breath as the patch of ice blocks drifted within reach, their voices a deafening, treasure-filled cacophony that promised me even more power if I could only survive the madness. The air around me was a cacophony of frantic, crystalline cries, a chaotic symphony of inanimate objects desperate for my attention, each one screaming its contents as if the survival of the entire frozen world depended on their immediate harvest. Catch me. Catch me. One block wailed, while another squealed. I have mud. I have mud. And a third boasted, I have plastic. I have plastic. I couldn't afford to be overwhelmed, so I cut through the noise with a sharp, commanding roar. Who has metal? My question acted like a flare in the dark, and instantly, a cluster of ice blocks responded in frantic unison. I do. I do. I lunged with my net, my movements honed by the urgency of the moment, scooping them up with a precision that bordered on greed, my eyes darting across the water as I abandoned the smaller scraps to chase the larger, more promising monoliths of ice. The remaining blocks, sensing their impending abandonment, cried out with a desperate, pathetic urgency. Hurry, hurry, I'm drifting away. And just as I turned my attention toward the open sea, a voice cut through the dissonance like a sharp blade. I have a blueprint. I have a blueprint. My heart hammered against my ribs. Blueprints were the foundation of my advancement, the only way to escape this subsistence-level existence, and I didn't hesitate, diving for that specific block as the rest of the cluster slipped away into the freezing gloom. Once the hull was secure, I broke them down one by one, the cold, satisfying clink of materials hitting my raft echoing like chimes. Acquired. Crushed ice X2, metal X1. System notifications flooded my vision, a treasure trove of resources, but the crown jewel was the blueprint for the large grill, a masterpiece of design that allowed for triple the efficiency of a simple setup at the cost of significantly more metal. I was ravenous, the physical toll of my labor clawing at my stomach, so I cracked open a can and devoured the contents with the raw, unchecked intensity of a wolf, feeling the calories seep back into my shivering limbs. With my belly finally silenced, I turned my attention to the trade channel, where the desperation of my peers was an open wound. Their posts were a litany of tragedy, sharks flipping rafts, chunks of living space bitten away, and people begging for the smallest scrap of sustenance. But one offer shimmered like a diamond in the rough. Who has food? I'll trade a pair of gloves for it. My mind whirred, calculating the value of warmth against the cost of my food stock. Wool gloves meant the ability to work longer, to endure the bite of the wind, and to stave off the creeping frostbite that was surely claiming others. I sent a private message, my fingers dancing over the interface, and after a tense, sharp round of psychological warfare and haggling, I secured the trade. 2 small sea fish for the wool gloves, plus a bonus of 3 pieces of metal and a shard of glass. As the items materialized on my raft, I slipped the wool gloves over my freezing, cramped fingers, feeling the immediate, blissful relief of their coarse warmth, and I immediately leveraged my remaining stock of fish to squeeze 5 more pieces of metal out of the market. I smirked at the empty air everyone thought they were gaining, but I was the one building an empire while they struggled to survive the hour. I had enough now to craft the iron wire needed for the grill, and even extra to fashion a pot for boiling water. The large grill hissed and groaned as it manifested over the crackling flames, and I set the fish to sear while tossing ice into the pot to boil, creating a small, civilized oasis in the middle of this hellish, shifting waste. Just as the savory aroma of cooking fish began to permeate the freezing air, a faint, rhythmic sound drifted up from the black, whirling depths beneath my feet, a voice so quiet and labored it seemed to be trembling with the weight of the world. So heavy. It's too heavy. I paused, my hand hovering over the grill, my brow furrowing as I searched the darkness of the sea. It wasn't the grating, cowardly whine of my ice flow, nor was it the boisterous, greedy chatter of the ice blocks. This was something else, something hidden and ancient, calling out from the crushing silence beneath the waves. A lingering, primal curiosity tugged at my mind, drawing my gaze toward the churning, dark depths that held so many secrets, and I shifted my focus to the surface beneath me, tapping a boot against the frozen, uneven ground. Old ice flow, did you hear anything down there? Playing dead again, are you? I demanded, punctuating my irritation by grabbing a thick, resinous piece of wood and shoving it directly into the heart of my campfire. The fire shrieked in an outrage of crackling sparks. Ah, why are you adding more wood to the fire? But I ignored the theatrics, my eyes narrowed as I pressed the sentient slab of ice for answers. Stop the performance, I muttered, my voice low and authoritative. Look and see what is actually talking down there in the black of the sea. The ice groaned, a sound of profound, lazy resentment, before its voice wavered with an affected, wheezing sigh. Geez. Can't you just ask nicely? Fine, I'll take a look, but it's cold, and my joints are stiff. The water visibility is too low. Ah, wait, I see it. It's a massive turtle carrying a stone tablet. I bristled, my patience thinning. Look closer, you old fraud, before you spout more nonsense. The The flow's voice grew defensive, bubbling with a simulated geriatric indignity. I'm old, my eyesight isn't what it used to be, okay? Give me a second. Alright, I see it clearly now. It's a turtle carrying a literal chest. My heart skipped a beat, the thrill of potential fortune surging through my veins. A chest, a real treasure chest, where is it? Right under me, it grunted, and I didn't wait for a second invitation, diving for my fishing net with the predatory speed of a shark. I swept the net through the frigid, opaque water, my arms aching as I took direction from the flow's chaotic, stuttering instructions, until finally, I felt the heavy, dead weight of the prize snagging the fibers. With a final, explosive heave, I dragged the chest onto the surface, the metal clattering onto my home with such violent momentum that the raft shuddered and groaned. My God, you freaking cracked me open. The flow wailed in genuine anguish, and when I looked down, my heart sank. A corner of the heavy, iron-bound chest was deeply embedded in the ice, a jagged web of cracks radiating from the impact zone. It actually cracked. Quick, tell me how to fix it before we sink, I demanded, panic threatening to choke me. Hurry, pour fresh water on the crack, it'll refreeze. I didn't think. I snatched the grilled fish from the grill, jammed the iron pot onto the flames, and prepared to boil water as if my life depended on it. As the ice sealed itself, I couldn't help but ask, by the way, where did the turtle go? Only to be met with a blistering, it ran away, obviously. How do you have the mood to ask that while I'm about to split in half? I tuned out the theatrics, my focus entirely on the treasure chest, which bore the ominous label, Frozen Iron Treasure Chest. Description, can yield more rare supplies. I didn't hesitate to force the lock, and a blinding, ethereal flash erupted, scattering a horde of materials across my raft. Acquired, glass X2, metal X2, granite X2, spiked meteor hammer X1. My hands trembled as I lifted the hammer, the weapon's weight reassuring and brutal, its head a sphere of jagged, lethal spikes. The system's warning, deals terrifying damage. Hitting yourself with it also deals terrifying damage made me handle it with the caution of a man holding a live grenade, and I promptly set it down in a safe corner, terrified I might accidentally turn my own raft into a fine slush. I retreated to the warmth of the campfire to contemplate my newfound power, watching the crushed ice in the pot melt into a life-giving stream of water, when the piece was shattered by a sound that made my blood run cold. It wasn't the petty bickering of my campfire, but a high-pitched, primal shriek of genuine, unadulterated terror from the ice flow beneath me. Help! The shark is back. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs, and there it was, a dorsal fin slicing through the dark water like a tombstone, followed by the massive, shifting shadow of a predator that seemed to blot out the light of the very sea. The beast didn't hesitate, its massive, blood-stained maw gaping open as it lunged, and before my brain could even register the threat, the shark's teeth slammed into the side of the flow with a sound like a thunderclap. Crack! The world tilted violently beneath me as a massive, jagged chunk of my foundation exploded into the sea, the remaining raft heaving under the sheer force of the impact, and I knew in an instant that the real fight for survival had only just begun. Ah, Mother of God, Shui Mu, do something, I'm literally being digested. The shark's impact was catastrophic, a force of pure, wet muscle and predatory intent that sent my entire world heaving into the air, the ice flow bucking like a wild stallion under my boots. I barely managed to maintain my equilibrium, my heart hammering against my ribs as I snatched up the spiked meteor hammer with a desperate, white-knuckled grip, and with a guttural roar, I unleashed it in a lethal arc, hurling the spiked weight straight at the shark's forehead. Crack! The sickening, wet sound of bone splintering echoed across the water as the iron head buried itself deep into the predator's skull. The monster shuddered, a seismic convulsion of dark flesh that sent plumes of blood erupting into the freezing air, and to my absolute shock, it let out a human-like, pathetic whine. Ouch! It hurts! I froze for a split second, my brain struggling to process the impossible. The shark was articulate, it was feeling, and it was terrified. But before I could leverage my advantage, the beast dove with a desperate flick of its tail, vanishing into the abyss to nurse its wounds. It actually got away. I cursed, my adrenaline-soaked lungs burning, but there was no time for frustration. I immediately turned my attention to the carnage, using my net to frantically fish out the jagged, drifting chunks of my home that had been torn away, dragging them back to the center of the flow and dousing them with fresh water to fuse the ice back together. How is it? Are you holding? I barked, and the ice flow, sounding like a shell-shocked veteran, wheezed, I'm fine now, but the campfire, he might not make it. I looked over to see the small iron pot overturned, my precious supply of fresh water leaching into the cracks, and the campfire itself extinguished in the chaos, a pile of wet, smoldering ruin. I mourned its loss for a heartbeat, then, driven by the cold-blooded necessity of this world, I immediately struck flint to tinder, building a new one. The moment the flames roared back to life, I heard the familiar, cantankerous voice return, sharp and indignant. I'm freezing. Who the hell splashed water on me just now? It was the same consciousness, defiant as ever, and I shoved the half-cooked sea fish back onto the grill, the aroma of searing meat quickly filling the air, and I devoured the meal with a ravenous, wolf-like hunger that acknowledged no manners, only fuel. The ice flow beneath me suddenly let out a series of rhythmic, creepy chuckles that made the hair on my arms stand up. What are you laughing at now? I asked, my nerves still frayed, and the ice floe gurgled. I just saw the shark that bit me get eaten by an even bigger shark. Nature is a beautiful, brutal thing, isn't it? My blood ran cold, and the sheer, existential terror of being the smallest thing in this food chain hit me with renewed intensity. Holy crap, a shark that big got eaten just like that? I didn't wait to deliberate. I inhaled the last of my fish, set the water to boil, and opened my crafting menu, pouring every scrap of crushed ice I possessed into the foundation, forcing the raft to expand from a 3x4 meter rectangle to a more secure 4x4, determined to be more than just a snack for the next Leviathan. As I finished, I stood at the edge of the expanded floe, eyes scanning the horizon for the next cluster of ice blocks, and when the noisy, bickering voices began to drift toward me, they carried a tone I hadn't heard before. Oh no, there's a human. A human. Ah, we're doomed. He's getting closer. I realized with a grim, sarcastic smile that these blocks were actually sentient enough to fear me, which presented a new tactical problem. If they were hiding their contents out of self-preservation, I had to be smarter than them. I cupped my hands around my mouth and bellowed into the wind. Who has mud? I need mud right now. The response was a chaotic, panicked mess of conflicting truth and lies. Not me. I'm wood. I'm a seashell. Don't pull me. I'm a grass bundle. Hee hee. But their very denials gave them away, and I laughed, the sound cold and sharp against the backdrop of the desolate sea. Little punks, trying to outsmart me, I muttered, casting my net with surgical precision, ignoring their shrill protests of, you liar, as I hauled them in one by one, working with the frenzy of a man who knew that in this game, knowledge was the only thing standing between him and the teeth of a giant shark. On my final throw, I didn't even bother to ask. I simply grabbed the largest, most stubborn block of ice within reach and heaved it onto the raft with a grunt of exertion, and as I smashed it open, the resulting pile of crushed ice, materials, and seafood confirmed my dominance. I was turning this unforgiving, frozen nightmare into my own personal supply depot, one screaming ice block at a time. With a single, masterfully delivered sentence, I had pried the truth from those deceptive ice blocks, turning their own fears into a resource map that laid their contents bare for me to harvest. I set to work with ruthless efficiency, systematically breaking down the salvaged ice until my raft was littered with a bounty of crushed ice, essential raw materials, and a decent haul of seafood. I was just beginning to organize my newfound wealth when the sky seemed to pulse with a sudden, ominous shift, and a glowing notification manifested in the air before me. Nightfall will arrive in 6 hours. Players, please prepare items needed to survive the night as soon as possible. Without any protective measures, you will not survive the freezing nighttime temperatures. The warning hit me like a physical blow, a chilling reminder that this world was not just a playground for the clever, but a death trap for the unprepared. The public channel erupted into a frantic, chaotic feed of human desperation. Does any big shot know what we need to prepare before nightfall? Warmth supplies. Obviously, you'll turn into a popsicle. As others debated the merits of grass mats versus cotton quilts, though it was clear that most had no real plan to survive the plummeting dark, I stood there, watching their panic, a calm sense of superiority washing over me as I thought of the igloo blueprints safely tucked away in my inventory. I was leagues ahead of the curve, provided I could put in the backbreaking labor required to realize my shelter. The requirements were daunting. Igloo required 100 units of crushed ice and 4 of fresh water, while a single grass mat demanded 10 grass bundles once the rope was woven, and to sleep with any measure of comfort, I'd need at least 5 or 6. It was a massive undertaking, but as I huddled by the campfire, my hands soaking in its fleeting, flickering warmth, I felt the old, cowardly ice floe beneath me begin to groan and shift with a series of frantic, whiny vibrations. Old ice floe, what are you complaining about now? I muttered, and the slab of ice shuddered under my feet, grumbling, there's a swarm of tiny shrimp nibbling on my underside. It tickles, and it's annoying. My exhaustion vanished instantly, replaced by a surge of predatory alertness. I grabbed my net, moved to the edge of the floe, and plunged it into the freezing water, sweeping with a precise, rhythmic motion that dragged a shimmering, wriggling mass of tiny life onto the surface. I worked until I couldn't catch another one, securing a haul of 186 tiny shrimp, but I didn't even stop to process the catch. I just shoveled them into the iron pot, added a chunk of ice to boil into a clear, nutrient-dense broth, and immediately returned to the edge of the raft to wait for the next wave of resources. The distant, overlapping cries of the ice blocks were already reaching me, a chorus of catch me, I have grass, and I knew this was my chance. I hauled in the bundles with a feverish intensity, quickly crafting my first grass mat, only to find it discouragingly thin. A single layer of woven grass would be no match for the void cold of the night, and realized I would need to double or triple that effort just to survive. The campfire began to dim, its flames flickering with a pathetic, dying light that mirrored my own waning energy, and I tossed in the last of my wood, the fire roaring back to life with a crackle of defiance. As I stood there, steam rising from the bubbling shrimp broth and the biting wind whipping at my face, a sudden, sharp shadow flickered against the twilight. A seabird, bold and opportunistic, descended in a blur of feathers to peck precisely at the surface of my raft. My hand went to my side, ready to defend my claim, but I stopped when I saw it wasn't attacking me. It was feasting on the tiny shrimp I'd left scattered on the ice, its eyes bright with a gluttonous intelligence that told me this bird was not just a scavenger, but potentially a new, unexpected variable in my long, cold night. There's another one. Target locked. Strike. The shout came from above, and my eyes snapped upward, locked onto the small feathered thief that had been raiding my shrimp stash. To my utter shock, the words didn't just register as bird calls, they were distinct, intelligible, and laced with a gluttonous glee as the creature swooped down again, snatching another tiny shrimp right out from under my nose. Yummy, yummy. Is there more? Let's keep looking. The realization hit me like a physical jolt. I could understand the avian language of this frozen hell, and a calculating, opportunistic idea began to bloom in the back of my mind. Hey little bird, I called out, my voice carrying over the whistling wind. I'll give you all the shrimp you want if you act as my scout and tell me if there are any ice blocks or threats floating ahead. How about it? The creature mid-flight faltered, wings flapping frantically as it nearly plummeted into the sea, its eyes widening in sheer, avian disbelief. My God, you can hear me? I didn't waste time with formalities. I reached into the iron pot, plucked out a handful of the briny, boiled shrimp, and held them out as a testament to my sincerity. As long as you help me, every single one of these is yours. The seabird, clearly ruled by its stomach, circled my head with a desperate, hungry curiosity. Let me taste one first. Let me taste one first. It shrieked, and I bargained with the sharp, practical focus of a merchant. You give me one piece of information, and I give you one, nothing more. It squawked in protest. One is too few, way too few. 3, I countered, unyielding. 3, at most, for a real lead. The bird hesitated, its tiny brain calculating the risk against the reward, before finally croaking out. All right, fine. There's an ice floe ahead of you, and there are 2 humans on it. They look super fierce and scary. My breath hitched in my chest, my previous calm replaced by a cold, calculating gravity as I processed the news. 2 fierce-looking men? In this lawless, frozen expanse, that could only mean one thing. I was likely dealing with marauding pirates who would see my resources as their own. Shrimp, shrimp, I want my payment. The bird chirped, and I tossed 5 of the tiny crustaceans onto the ice, stepping back to give it space. It dove with the precision of a hunting hawk, snatching them up in a blink. If you're going to eat, just eat. Stop pecking at my foundation every time you land, you feathered menace. The ice floe beneath me grumbled, but I ignored the inanimate bickering, my focus locked on the scout. Emboldened by its meal, the bird became a model of eager cooperation, chirping, good human, what else do you want to know? I leaned in, my gaze fixed on the horizon where a threat was surely lurking. Go back and scout those 2, check their weapons, their supplies, and gauge the exact distance. If you come back with a full report, I'll give you 50 shrimp. The reward was clearly astronomical in the bird's mind, for it nodded with manic intensity and shot off like a bullet, leaving me to the sudden, heavy silence of the ice. I took the opportunity to open my crafting menu, desperately seeking a way to manage the mounting piles of clutter that were threatening to turn my raft into a tripping hazard, but the search for an ice storage box or a wooden storage box led me to a snag. Both required a magic ice crystal, a resource I hadn't encountered yet. I vowed to watch for it like a hawk during my next salvage, but my internal planning was cut short by the frantic, high-pitched squawking of my scout returning from the distance. It was spiraling in the air, its voice shrill with genuine, gut-wrenching terror. So scary, so scary. They tried to kill me. They wanted to roast me. I scrambled to soothe the creature, tossing more shrimp onto the ice to anchor it as it landed, its chest heaving. Calm down, take a breath, and tell me what you saw, I urged, and after it wolfed down the shrimp to steady its nerves, it stammered. I went close and almost got caught in their net. Those monsters wanted to cook me for dinner. Forget the bird roasting, I pressed, my voice hard and cold. What do they have on their raft? They have a huge pile of crushed ice, mountains of grass bundles for bedding, and 2 long, sharp spears. They looked like they were waiting for someone to attack. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face impassive. And the distance? The bird looked toward the horizon with a shiver of leftover fear. It'll take them 2 or 3 hours of drifting before they cross your path. I nodded, a thin, dangerous smile playing on my lips. 2 or 3 hours was just enough time for me to prepare a very unpleasant surprise. When the time comes, if those 2 fools really dare to pull up alongside and try to rob me, I'll let my spiked meteor hammer do the talking and teach them a lesson they won't live to regret, I muttered, my voice cold and focused. As the seabird finished the last of its tribute, its beady eyes darting hungrily toward the iron pot. It looked ready to beg for more, and I obliged, tossing it a few extra tiny shrimp, just to keep the partnership sweet. The bird gulped them down in a frantic, gluttonous blur before flapping its wings and taking to the sky to resume its vigil. With the scout deployed, I settled back down by the campfire, the crackling flames offering a fragile, flickering sense of security against the encroaching dark, while the seafood broth in the iron pot bubbled with a savory, albeit thin, aroma. My peaceful contemplation was abruptly shattered as a new patch of debris entered my field of vision, and my breath hitched dead center in the cluster was a massive, pulsating ice block, radiating a surreal, 7-colored glow that shimmered like oil on water. What on earth is that? A rainbow-colored ice block? I whispered, my heart rate spiking with a mix of curiosity and greed. These blocks were remarkably cooperative, their voices singing out their contents from dozens of meters away, and I stood up, gripping my net with white-knuckled anticipation. I moved with practiced fluid grace, hauling in 2 blocks loaded with grass bundles first, before turning my full attention to the behemoth. So heavy. I grunted, the weight of the rainbow block threatening to pull me off balance, and as I finally dragged it onto the surface of my home, the flow groaned and rocked violently beneath me, the old ice spirit howling. My God, it's too heavy. Am I going to sink? I ignored the melodramatic whining of my foundation, my focus entirely on the radiant prize that now sat at my feet, and I quickly finished salvaging the remaining 5 blocks, a solid haul, before kneeling to inspect the crown jewel of the day. I raised my pickaxe to strike, but the system pinged with a firm refusal. Cannot be broken down directly. I frowned, my brow furrowing in confusion. What is going on? I probed, and the system obliged with a reveal that sent a jolt of electricity through my veins. Magical rainbow ice block. Description: the rarest ice block on the sea. Can only be broken down using a magic ice crystal hammer. Upon breaking it down, you are 100% guaranteed to receive a high-tier unique item. My mind raced, the potential value was staggering, and I immediately opened my crafting menu, my fingers scrolling frantically until I found the recipe. Ice crystal hammer requires magic ice crystal X5. Description: a hammer forged from magic ice crystals. A wave of icy frustration washed over me as I stared at the requirements. Magic ice crystals? Where in this desolate, frozen hell am I supposed to find those? I was stuck, the rarest treasure within reach but locked behind a gate I couldn't yet open. And with no other ice blocks in sight to salvage, I turned to the public channel as a last resort. The chat was a useless deluge of people bartering for basic grass bundles. I need grass. Who has grass? And after skimming the repetitive, panicked cries of the unprepared, I realized I was ahead of the game. I didn't need the bundles for myself, but perhaps, with enough effort, I could hoard them as currency to trade for those elusive crystals. I closed the channel with a sharp snap of my fingers, the lack of intel leaving me feeling restless, and I grabbed the iron pot, gulping down the lukewarm seafood soup. It was bland, salty, and barely palatable, but it was fuel, and I needed every calorie I could get. Just as I set the empty pot aside, the ice floe beneath me shuddered, and I heard the faint, bubbling chorus of a fresh batch of blocks drifting out of the fog toward my position, the hunt beginning all over again. Time to get to work, I muttered to the biting wind, my voice steady despite the encroaching chill, as I turned my focus back to the horizon, relying on the uncanny chorus of the drifting ice blocks to shout out their contents. I began to work with a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat, scooping up every bundle of grass with a precision that turned the exhausting labor into an art form. My efficiency was soaring, each successful retrieval fueling my confidence until I saw a breakthrough. 16 bundles in this single haul. If I can keep this pace, 2 more batches and I'll have enough to craft the mats needed for my shelter. I broke down the salvaged blocks, the clink-clink-clink of frozen resources stacking on my raft, acting as a siren song for my progress, and I immediately poured the raw, crushed ice into the foundation of my home, feeling the flow expand under my feet with a heavy, satisfying thud. I was just about to collapse by the warmth of the fire, my muscles screaming for a moment of respite, when a tiny, persistent white dot on the horizon snagged my attention. As it drifted closer, the shape resolved into a secondary raft, and upon it, 2 distinct, desperate figures. The allied pirates the seabird warned me about. I realized, my grip tightening on the handle of the spiked meteor hammer until my knuckles turned white, my eyes tracking the distance as they maneuvered a crude wooden raft that looked wildly out of place in this icebound purgatory. Is this a crossover? Did some raft survival game bleed into my reality? No matter, I won't let them touch a single scrap of my hard-won supplies. They were paddling with frantic, jerky strokes, closing the distance while barking hollow threats. Listen up, kid. Hand over everything you've got or don't blame us if things get nasty. I couldn't help a grim, internal chuckle. They were already panting from the exertion of paddling against the current, and I wondered if they even had the strength left to hold those weapons, let alone wield them. I slid the meteor hammer behind my back, my silhouette deceptively relaxed against the backdrop of the flames as they drew near, and the skinny one, a pathetic, trembling thing, gasped, "Boss, look at the haul. He's got everything: resources, heating equipment, food. We're rich." The fat man behind him, his face twisted into a mask of gluttonous impatience, shrieked, "Hurry, ram us in and snatch it all." I stood still, letting them believe their intimidation was working as they drifted toward their own undoing. When they were mere meters away, the skinny one stood up, trying to look imposing, and the fat leader raised a rusted long spear with a shaking hand. "I'm warning you both," I said, my voice cutting through the air, cool and sharp as ice. "If you keep eyeing my property, you'll face the consequences." The fat man sneered, "You dare act arrogant in front of us? Number 2, move in and break him." With a jarring thud, their raft slammed into my flow, and suddenly the air was filled with a high-pitched, wailing panic. "Ouch! You dare ram into me? Shumu, sink him, destroy them." My own ice floe shrieked in outrage, while from beneath our feet, the enemy raft suddenly let out a frantic, trembling bleat. "No, no, no. I'm just a wooden raft. I'm innocent. Please, don't hurt me." I blinked, my brain momentarily reeling. What the fuck? The enemy's raft can talk too. Shuemu, don't listen to it. Flip this traitorous piece of wood. Bro, please, I'm just a slave to the oars. Hurry, hurry, hurry. No. Shut the FCK up, both of you. I roared, the sensory overload of 3 sentient objects screaming in my ears, giving me a migraine, and the raw, cold authority in my voice caused the skinny pirate to falter in mid-threat. I haven't even said anything he started, but I was already in motion. I didn't care about their excuses, and with a blur of momentum, I swung the meteor hammer, the heavy iron head connecting with his temple in a sickening crack, sending him sprawling into unconsciousness. The fat man scrambled backward in a blind, unadulterated terror, thrusting his spear forward in a desperate, wild arc to keep me at bay. But I didn't flinch. I backhanded a throw, the chain of the hammer whipping through the air like a metallic serpent, instantly coiling around the shaft of his weapon. The impact jerked his arms violently, and as he yanked back in a panic, the sheer kinetic force of the chain locked the spear in place, turning his own weapon into a tether that pulled him right toward his defeat. The fat pirate leader, emboldened by his underling's initial strike, drove his raft forward with a desperate, greedy intensity, and even without the aid of my unique ability, the frantic, warning shriek of my own ice flow would have been enough to alert me. Shuemu, that fat slob is preparing a sneak attack from the flank. I didn't need to look. I held the chain of my spiked meteor hammer taut, the cold metal biting into my palm as I waited for the precise moment of their overconfidence. Just as the fat man prepared to lunge, I abruptly released the tension on the chain, a sudden, deceptive shift in my stance that caught the already unbalanced skinny pirate completely off guard. He stumbled backward, his arms windmilling in the air, and I didn't hesitate, planting my boot firmly against his chest and delivering a swift, forceful kick that sent him spiraling into the frigid depths of the sea. Help, boss, save me, the cold, I'm freezing to death. His desperate cries echoed across the water, but the fat man only spat. Useless trash. Wait until I finish this kid off. Cold-blooded and singular in his mission, he ignored his drowning subordinate and paddled the wooden raft with renewed vigor, slamming into my home base with a jarring thud before leaping onto the ice, his long spear leveled at my throat like a venomous tongue. The momentum of his charge, intended to impale me, had worked in his favor, but as he yanked hard on the spear to leverage me toward the edge, I stumbled, or at least, I let him think I did, using the motion to snatch the small iron pot directly off my blazing grill. It was still filled with boiling, half-melted ice water, and with a roar of defiance I didn't swing a weapon. I slammed the pot, steam, boiling water, and all, directly into his face. Ah! It's freezing, the fat man shrieked, the thermal shock sending him into an immediate, violent convulsion as the icy liquid robbed him of his senses and his strength. Seizing the opening, I launched a flying kick that caught him square in the chest, sending him tumbling backward into the black, unforgiving water. Playing dirty with me, huh? Number 2, hurry up and help me. I can't swim. He sputtered, thrashing against the encroaching lethargy of the sea, but I knew, and he soon realized, that his partner was already beyond help. The skinny man was floating motionless, stiff as a board in the shallows. Despair washed over the fat man's face, his movements turning sluggish as the hypothermia took hold, and before he could even finish his plea, the water surged as a massive, dark shape sliced through the surface. A giant shark, a true apex predator of this hellish expanse, rose up and swallowed the fat man whole in a single, grisly gulp. Without a second's hesitation, it snapped up the frozen corpse of his underling as well, a silent, efficient cleaner of the sea, before disappearing back into the abyss. Thank you, Mother Nature, for the gift, I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs as I watched the silhouette vanish. The creature was gargantuan, a stark reminder of my own vulnerability, and I vowed then and there that I had to expand my territory at any cost. I looked at the drifting, abandoned pirate raft and the remnants of their supplies, feeling a surge of predatory satisfaction. I quickly crafted 2 long, sturdy grass ropes and 4 iron nails from the salvaged metal, and as my own ice flow wailed and whined about the unnatural procedure, I hammered the nails into the edges of the 2 flows and lashed them together with the cordage, fusing my home into a larger, more stable fortress. I sifted through the spoils a few bundles of grass, some worn mats, and another small iron pot, and as I set them to heat, preparing fresh water to further reinforce the bond between the ice, the horizon stirred again. A fresh, chaotic cluster of ice blocks began to drift my way, and I didn't waste a second, leaping onto the pirates' captured raft and paddling out to meet them, ignoring their panicked, collective shouting of "Run! Help! Someone's trying to catch us!" As I maneuvered through the waves with ease, scooping up every single block and adding them to my growing empire of ice. As I hauled the final batch of salvaged ice onto my now crowded base, the ice floe beneath me began to shudder and groan with a high-pitched, frantic whine. Shuemu, you have to expand me now. I'm serious. If you pile on even one more block, I'm going to surrender to the deep. For once, the cowardly slab wasn't being melodramatic. The sheer weight of our combined loot was pushing the edges of my home perilously close to the freezing waterline. Wasting no time, I grabbed the iron pot from the grill, where the last of the crushed ice had succumbed to the heat, rendering a precious, steaming supply of fresh water. I poured it carefully across the seam where my original 4x5 meter floe met the jagged 2x3 meter pirate raft, watching as the liquid froze instantly, bonding the two disparate surfaces into a single, albeit awkwardly shaped, mass. To reclaim some sense of stability, I spent the next grueling hour shoveling crushed ice into the perimeter gaps, working with a rhythmic, desperate focus until the structure expanded into a solid 6 by 8 meter expanse, its surface level once again. Finally able to breathe, I turned my attention to the remaining loot, methodically breaking down the blocks with my pickaxe until I unearthed a strange, iridescent lump of combustible ice. Combustible ice can be used as an energy source for special equipment, must be stored in a sealed container. The system's warning hummed in my mind, but lacking a proper sealable vessel, I set it aside as a curiosity for later. Looking at my mountain of surplus grass, a business opportunity struck. I bypassed the mindless chatter of the public channel, which was currently flooded with desperate pleas for basic warmth, and posted a singular, cold-blooded offer: selling grass bundles. DM, if interested. I want magic ice crystals. The response was instantaneous and chaotic, a cascade of desperate offers flooding my vision, but I held my ground with the precision of a seasoned merchant. I eventually settled on a trade with a player who possessed 2 magic ice crystals. They tried to drive a hard bargain, but I leaned in, tossing the previously discarded combustible ice into the mix to close the gap, securing my prize with a predatory grin. With the 2 precious crystals tucked safely into my inventory, I turned my focus to survival, crafting 5 dense, insulating grass mats while keeping an ear to the horizon. Suddenly, the sea stirred again, bringing a fresh, noisy cluster of debris my way, and as I leaped onto the wooden raft and paddled toward them, a bizarre, overlapping chorus of voices rose from the water. Catch me, I have ice. And, most unexpectedly, I have an egg. I have an egg. My curiosity piqued an egg in this frozen wasteland. And I paddled with everything I had, maneuvering the raft to scoop up every block in the patch. I snagged the egg block with extra care, along with the standard haul of grass and wood, until my raft was weighed down to its absolute limit, then navigated the sluggish vessel back to my expanded flow. I began the breakdown process with frantic energy, but when I cracked open the block that had promised an egg, I recoiled in confusion. It wasn't a biological specimen at all, but a heavy, cold, and undeniably lethal artillery shell. Are you kidding me? I muttered, rotating the metallic object in my hands. I don't even have a cannon, so what am I supposed to do with this? Shrugging off the absurdity, I returned to my primary goal, churning out 6 more grass mats until my supplies were nearly exhausted. I pulled up the igloo blueprint one last time, my heart sinking slightly at the requirement. Igloo requires crushed ice x100, fresh water x4. I had all the ice I could ever need, but I was still short on water, and since I lacked a proper vessel to store it, I quickly spent some of my hard-won resources to craft a sturdy, 10-unit iron bucket, ready to begin the final phase of my construction. I carefully poured my meager 2 units of fresh water into the newly crafted iron bucket, then immediately jammed 2 more generous chunks of crushed ice into the blackened, well-worn iron pot to keep the supply chain running, my movements efficient and practiced in the fading light of the dying sun. The world was rapidly dimming, the horizon bleeding out into a bruised purple. But just as the last of the light dipped below the edge of the world, my final 2 units of water were ready, bubbling with a quiet, persistent promise of survival. With the materials finally secured, I pulled up the crafting interface and selected craft for the igloo. The 100 chunks of crushed ice and the 4 units of fresh water evaporated from my inventory in a flash of light, and in their place, a dome of white, architectural perfection materialized in the center of my expanded flow. I stepped through the entrance to inspect my handiwork, ducking my head instinctively as I navigated the low clearance. It was sturdy, cool, and silent, a sanctuary of frozen architecture that felt like a palace in this godforsaken reach. I laid out my woven grass mats, organized my meager supply of wood and tools, and finally allowed myself to sink down by the campfire, my body exhaling a long, weary sigh. Finally, I muttered to the flames, I've got the essentials locked down, but there's one glaring problem left: I'm starving. I looked down at the surface of my home, calling out, Old ice flow, wake up, scan the depths and tell me if there's anything edible down there. The slab of ice beneath me shuddered with a lazy, indignant vibration, its voice a grating, static-filled grumble. It's pitch black in the sea at night. Where exactly do you expect me to look? I'm an ice flow, not a submarine. I didn't have the patience for his laziness, so I reached out and tossed another piece of fuel into the campfire, watching the embers flare with a violent, hungry roar. The heat licked at the surface of the ice, and the old flow let out a high-pitched, terrified shriek. Ah, okay, stop. I'll look. Just keep that fire away from my underside. After a string of pathetic, stuttering excuses and whiny complaints, the flow finally fell silent, its consciousness plunging into the dark, churning water, until it suddenly jolted with a sharp, frantic shout. There, a squid. It's right beneath us. I didn't wait for a second invitation. I grabbed my reinforced fishing net and vaulted out of the igloo, my eyes tracking the disturbance as I followed the flow's telepathic guidance until I hauled the creature up a decent-sized, wriggling squid that looked like a king's banquet in my current state. Haha, not bad at all. You're going to be my midnight snack, little friend, I laughed, prepping it with ruthless speed and tossing it onto the searing grill. The aroma of roasting seafood quickly eclipsed the smell of the damp night, and I devoured the meal in a series of gluttonous, steaming bites. Satiated and warm, I opened the public channel to kill time, scrolling through the frantic trade requests until a singular, eerie message caught my eye, a player claiming to have spotted a massive ship on the horizon, followed quickly by another, confirming the sighting. A ship, in this frozen wasteland. If it's real, it's either a savior or a ghost ship, and in this world, I'm betting on the latter. I need to keep my eyes open, I reasoned, the cold weight of suspicion settling in my gut before I finally succumbed to the exhaustion and drifted into a heavy, dreamless sleep. I was jolted awake by an earth-shattering tremor that felt like the entire world was being wrenched apart, and as I scrambled to my feet, the flow beneath me was screaming, "Oh no, the mother is here for revenge. She's huge. Shuemu, jump into the sea and run. It's the only way." I ignored the panic-stricken babble and lunged toward the igloo's entrance, but the air outside was blocked by a glistening, massive tentacle that had already slithered onto my deck. "Give me back my child's life," a voice boomed from the abyss, echoing with a primal, sorrowful rage, and as I scrambled for my meteor hammer, I realized with a jolt of pure terror that 4 gargantuan tentacles were currently coiled around the edges of the ice. I retreated into the igloo, my heart hammering against my ribs, but the beast wasn't giving up. A massive, suction-cup tentacle snaked through the low entrance, groping blindly in the dark. Pinned into a corner with nowhere left to run, I grabbed the offending limb and shoved it back with all my might, watching as it accidentally brushed against the white-hot surface of my iron grill. A loud, sickening sizzle filled the dome as the flesh charred. The squid shrieked in agony, attempting to retract, but I caught hold of the tentacle, locking my grip with a desperate, adrenaline-fueled strength, and hauled it forward, slamming it directly onto the roaring coals. "Looking for trouble, are you? Watch me roast you alive," I screamed, the white smoke spiraling up as the smell of burning sea flesh filled the air, and from the deep, icy darkness outside, a shrill, piercing cry of agony echoed, tearing through the night. The beast went absolutely berserk, its massive tentacles lashing out with enough force to threaten the very structural integrity of my icebound fortress. Yet I stood my ground, my hands clamped firmly onto the limb I had pinned to the searing grill, refusing to yield an inch in this primal test of endurance. We were locked in a grueling stalemate, my defiance against its rage, when a massive, thunderous splash erupted from the churning Black Sea, and for a fleeting, heart-pounding moment, I feared the creature was preparing to unleash some apocalyptic ultimate move to shatter the flow beneath me. Instead, in a display of calculated self-preservation that shocked me to my core, the squid abruptly severed its own massive, scorched tentacle and vanished into the depths with a fading, guttural hiss of, "I'll be back." I stood panting on the ice, adrenaline still surging through my veins, and shouted after it, "Come back if you have the guts. I'll be waiting to turn the rest of you into teppanyaki." As the chaos receded, the first fragile light of dawn began to bleed across the horizon, turning the icy wasteland into a landscape of shimmering silver, a perfect, if surreal, backdrop for breakfast. I turned my attention to the grisly, severed prize left on my deck, and to my delight, the system confirmed my harvest. Acquired, squid meat X10. Not bad, I mused, the tension in my shoulders finally unspooling. That was enough protein to sustain me for 10 full meals. I threw a slab of the meat onto the grill, the rich, savory aroma quickly masking the lingering scent of burnt sea creature, and as it sizzled, I grabbed my net and scrambled out of the igloo to catch the new wave of ice blocks drifting toward my position. The morning haul was productive, yielding a collection of basic materials, a length of sturdy rope, and, most curiously, a climbing pickaxe blueprint. What could I possibly need a climbing pickaxe for in the middle of a frozen ocean? I pondered, but the gears in my mind were already turning. Unless, of course, I meant to encounter an iceberg. I wasted no time in crafting one, a preemptive strike against the unknown, before retreating inside to inhale my breakfast. With a lull in the drift, I checked the public channel, and my eyes widened as I saw a player frantically detailing their encounter with a massive, looming iceberg. An opportunity for profit flared in my mind, and I sent a message out like a hunter casting a line, selling climbing pickaxes, only accepting rare supplies in trade. First come, first served. I immediately opened a private channel with the player who mentioned the iceberg, my tone smooth and opportunistic. "Bro, those icebergs are notoriously slippery. I've got exactly what you need to survive it." Interested, the response was instantaneous, and after a brief, one-sided negotiation, I walked away with 10 wood, 10 metal, and another artillery shell. He folded so quickly, I thought with a pang of regret, I definitely undersold that. The realization didn't last long, as a barrage of new private messages flooded my vision, and as I scrambled to craft more pickaxes, my floor groaned in a pathetic, dramatic whine. There are too many things. Think about me. My old, frail body can't take this much weight. I rolled my eyes at the old ice flow's classic, daily hyperbole, and kept my focus on the trade, successfully pushing through several more high-value deals, one of which yielded the holy grail of materials, a magic ice crystal. The market was booming as word of the iceberg spread, but just as I reached the peak of my selling spree, the momentum faltered, and a quick scan of the channel revealed the inevitable arrival of market competition. Someone was undercutting my prices, so I adjusted my rates with the cold efficiency of a corporate raider, keeping the sales coming. But when a second rival dropped the price even further, I stepped back, watching the margins erode. The golden age of the climbing pickaxe is over, I decided, closing the channel with a shrug. There was no profit left in the scramble, and I knew it was time to look for the next wave of chaos to exploit. After wrapping up the final wave of pickaxe transactions, I decided to pivot away from the market, my attention drawn back to the physical state of my home as the old ice floe beneath my feet began a high-pitched, frantic and suspiciously dramatic wail. Shuemu. I'm serious, you're so blinded by greed you're going to get us both killed. I'm sinking, you fool. I dismissed the outburst as typical alarmism, but the flow wasn't playing this time. It let out a soul-crushing, garbled, "Help, I'm actually going to drown this time." My heart skipped a beat as I looked down, only to see seawater lapping hungrily over the edges of my platform, flooding the deck and drenching my campfire. The flames hissed in a pathetic, sputtering protest, belching thick, choking plumes of white smoke as the fire began to succumb to the brine. Holy hell, why didn't you warn me the water level was rising? I barked, grabbing my gear, but the flow shrieked back. I've been screaming at you for an eternity, but you were too busy counting your profits to listen. I cursed under my breath, annoyed that his constant, lying cries of wolf had masked a genuine catastrophe, and immediately set to work, dumping every spare unit of crushed ice I possessed into the perimeter to shore up the structure. I worked with a frantic, sweating intensity, expanding the foundation until it stretched into a sturdy, elevated 8 by 10 meter expanse, finally lifting the edges of my home well above the unforgiving tide. Just as the stability returned, a tiny, gleaming white speck pierced the horizon ahead, an iceberg, majestic and daunting, slowly drifting toward my position. With a few hours to spare before it arrived, I decided to turn my culinary bounty into profit, opening the public channel to broadcast, selling squid tentacle, accepting high-tier supplies. The response was instant, though the skeptics flooded the chat with doubt, questioning if a mere tentacle was worth anything at all. I ignored the trolls, focusing instead on the flood of private messages, including one from the ever-lucky Zhu Daiyu, who queried the size of the chunks. When I told him they were as thick as a human thigh, he practically salivated through the screen. We settled on a trade, an alarm clock for 2 pieces of meat, then he sweetened the deal by offering steel cables and a long rope for 2 more. I haggled the rope down to a single piece of meat, prompting him to offer a bizarre inventory of floral underwear and a sun umbrella, which I firmly declined with a mix of confusion and irritation. Where on earth was he finding this junk? He claimed he'd scavenged it from an empty flow, a stroke of luck that left me marveling until he suddenly went silent, only to return with a frantic, terrifying message. Bro, I'm in deep trouble. A ghost is haunting me in broad daylight. He explained that the items he'd salvaged were cursed, with the entity promising to hunt down whoever possessed them. I'll give you everything including a backpack for 5 pieces of meat, he pleaded. I scoffed at the price, but the mention of a woven backpack, an item offering 50 weightless storage slots, piqued my interest enough to negotiate him down to 4 pieces of meat. I finalized the trade, clutching the new gear as the system interface confirmed its utility, but my blood ran cold when a sudden, ominous flicker washed over the backpack, and the description updated with a chilling warning. Will attract an evil spirit. A dark, predatory excitement curled in my gut. I didn't fear the curse. I viewed it as an inevitable challenge, and I was already looking forward to hunting down whatever spirit thought it could haunt me. I prioritized the safety of my gear, stuffing my excess supplies into the newly acquired woven backpack, which felt remarkably light despite the volume of items I tucked away. And then, with a focused mind, I dove into the crafting menu. The ghost-slaying blade was my next objective, a necessity given the lingering, malevolent presence that had hitched a ride on my new equipment, requiring a precious magic ice crystal and 5 units of metal, a steep price in this scarcity-stricken world, but my intuition told me it was an investment in survival. Craft, I commanded, and as the materials shimmered and dissolved, a heavy, cold machete materialized in my grip, humming with a faint, jagged energy specifically tuned to harvest ethereal life. I barely had a moment to appreciate the weapon's balance when a prickle of static electricity danced across my spine, followed by a gust of unnaturally frigid air. I whipped around, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and there it was, a distorted, flickering silhouette that had materialized out of the thin air like a stain on reality. I let out a sharp shout, "It's a ghost!" and the sudden, booming noise startled the entity just as much as it had me. For a heartbeat, we were locked in an intensely awkward, silent standoff, the silence of the ice floe suddenly deafening. The spirit recovered first, its features twisting into a hateful, hollow grimace as it raised elongated, razor-sharp claws and surged toward me with terrifying speed. I didn't think. I moved, my arm sweeping the ghost-slaying blade in a clean, decisive arc that cleaved the air and the creature alike. The blade made contact, feeling like it sliced through cold smoke, and with a soft, expiring poof, the phantom disintegrated into a swirling cloud of dark vapor, leaving nothing behind but a small, shimmering object on the deck. I picked it up, evil spirit magic gold, dropped by killing ethereal creatures, use currently unknown, and tossed it into my pack, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. With the immediate threat neutralized, I turned my attention to the looming iceberg, which was now creeping closer across the horizon. Despite the persistent, grumbling complaints of the ice floe beneath me, which seemed to take personal offense at my every move, I hammered 3 heavy iron nails into its surface, tethering them to 3 steel cables I had meticulously fashioned to ensure I wouldn't lose my footing. With the preparations complete, I retreated into the warmth of my igloo, fueled by the final, savory piece of grilled squid, and dove into the public channel to scavenge for intelligence. The chatter was a goldmine of warning, tales of mischievous, treasure-filled chests that scampered into the sea at the slightest provocation, and accounts of complex ice caves hidden within the icebergs, some housing fortune, others hosting death. Armed with this knowledge, I allowed myself a brief, restorative nap before the jarring thud of the iceberg colliding with my floe jolted me awake. I didn't hesitate, vaulting onto the frozen, imposing slope and scrambling to find a secure anchor point where I could sink my nails. Which bastard is drilling into my head while I'm trying to get some rest? A deep, crystalline voice bellowed, vibrating through the very surface I was standing on. I stumbled, my shock visible as I gasped, "Holy crap, the iceberg talks." I quickly suppressed the urge to argue with a geological formation, refocusing on the task as I finished securing the steel cables, and despite the absurdity of the situation, I cupped my hands and shouted, "Look, I'm just asking, are you going to let me climb up, or do we have a problem?" The mountain beneath me let out a resonant, haughty rumble. "Can't you see how steep and handsome I am? I refuse to let anyone climb me." I stood on the precipice, staring up at the sheer, vertical wall of ice I was determined to conquer, fully aware that my climb was destined to be as contentious as it was dangerous. The mountain beneath me was indeed a nightmare of vertical, crystalline geometry, punishingly steep and practically begging for a climber to plummet into the abyss. So I decided to play my trump card. I flourished the sharpened climbing pickaxe in my hand, catching the pale, reflected light of the sky. "Make no mistake, I'm getting to that peak," I told the mountain, my voice cold and pragmatic. "If I have to, I'll craft a dozen more of these pickaxes, and if my climb isn't smooth, you're just going to end up looking like a pincushion with 1,000 new holes." The iceberg vibrated with a disgruntled, resonant groan. "So, either way, I'm the one suffering?" I smiled, pressing the sharp steel edge against the ice. "Suffering is a certainty at this point, but if you guide me along an easy path, I save my energy, and you get stabbed significantly less, so it's a win-win, don't you think?" Facing the dual threat of my determination and the gleaming steel, the iceberg folded, truthfully confessing the location of its most guarded caches, and to my utter shock, it revealed that the ice cave hidden just beneath the summit contained a genuine magic ice crystal, an absolute treasure in this desolate hellscape. Overjoyed, I had the mountain indicate the gentlest incline, and I began the grueling, lung-burning ascent, scaling the slick, frozen face amidst the iceberg's continuous, pathetic wailing about its wounded pride. After an arduous climb, I reached a flat plateau just below the peak where supplies were scattered like debris from a forgotten wreck. I scavenged every scrap, stuffing them into my pack before crawling into the cave. The interior was a frozen sanctum, littered with even more resources, and after stripping the cave bare, I moved to the next one, securing the shimmering magic ice crystal with a sense of triumph. "Everything is accounted for except the final chest," I muttered, looking up toward the jagged, impossibly steep summit where a frozen treasure chest sat perched at the very top. Though it wouldn't flee on its own, the slope was too sheer for me to attempt a reckless grab. Just then, a familiar, screeching voice cut through the whistling wind. "Shrimp, shrimp, I want to eat shrimp." I looked up to see a blur of feathers, the little seabird, Old Sixth, circling overhead, and I pulled out a thick chunk of succulent squid tentacle, dangling it as bait. "Haha, right on time, my feathered friend. So big, is it all for me? What do you need me to do, boss?" The bird chirped, its eyes locked on the meat. I tore off a small morsel and tossed it onto the ice. "This is the deposit, eat up, then help me nudge that chest down, and if you pull off the job, the whole piece is yours." The bird snatched the meat in a heartbeat, squawking, "Boss is generous, going to work now." It flapped its wings and ascended like a bullet, aiming for the peak, where it delivered a series of rhythmic, determined kicks to the heavy container. I watched with a grin in a world where everything, even the ice in the mountains, had a personality. This little bird was the only one who truly understood the value of an honest day's labor for a good meal. But suddenly, the chest defied all logic. Instead of tumbling down, it emitted a strange, rhythmic clicking sound, leaped off the summit on its own, and slammed into the ice inches from my boots. The system interface pinged, updating its status to lively treasure chest, and before I could even reach for the latch, the container grew a pair of spindly, sturdy legs and hopped away with a mischievous, rattling giggle. I dove for it, but the thing possessed incredible, twitchy footwork, dodging my lunges with ease. I've slaughtered pirates, I've cleaved spirits into smoke, and I refuse to be outclassed by a box with legs. I roared, waiting for the perfect, split-second opening before launching myself forward, successfully tackling the thing and landing squarely on its lid. The chest was shockingly robust, and even with my full body weight crushing it down, it continued to hop around with wild, frantic energy, carrying me on its back like a bucking bronco as I fought to maintain my grip. "Hurry up, you glorified toolbox. Open yourself up," I demanded, my patience wearing thin as I hammered my fist against the unyielding metal lid of the chest, only for a cold, system-generated notification to flicker across my vision. "The lively iron treasure chest refuses to be opened by you." "You absolute I roared, my frustration boiling over, and in a fit of genuine, unadulterated spite, I drew my pickaxe and slammed it into the top of the chest, creating a jagged, venting hole. Ah, my head is leaking. The chest shrieked in a high-pitched, metallic panic, and I didn't hesitate, shoving my hand straight through the puncture to salvage whatever treasure lay within. Notifications cascaded through my mind, confirming a bounty of loot, and the second I had the goods, I hoisted my weight off and vaulted clear, watching as the chest frantically scrambled away on its spindly legs. "Just you wait, you thief. My brothers will come and avenge me for this," it squealed, but before it could even get the threat out of its metallic throat, Old Sixth, my newfound avian accomplice, swooped down with the precision of a dive bomber, delivering a massive, singular kick that sent the container cartwheeling off the edge of the iceberg and plunging into the dark, churning sea. "Stupid bird! You actually sneak attacked me!" The chest's voice faded into the distance, and I couldn't help but laugh. I turned to the seabird and tore the remaining portion of the squid tentacle into small, neat shreds, scattering them across the ice. "Nice work, Old Sixth here. Take your commission," I said, watching as the bird dove for the prize. "Yay, it's way more than before," it chirped, convinced by the sheer optical illusion of the shredded meat, and after a few frantic, gluttonous bites, it took flight. "Save some for me. I'll call my brothers to eat together," it promised, and through a quick exchange, I learned it was part of a 10-member flock, specifically the sixth-born, effectively turning him into the Old Sixth of our operation. He circled twice, delighting in his new name, before darting off to gather his kin. I left the remaining meat as a lure and began my treacherous descent, ignoring the iceberg's continuous, agonizing wails as I climbed down to the safety of my home. Once inside the familiar warmth of my igloo, I had just begun to thaw my frozen limbs by the fire, when a chaotic, cacophonous chorus of squawks erupted outside, signaling the return of the flock. All 10 birds descended, clearly unsatisfied with the portion size, and after some sharp negotiation, we reached a symbiotic deal. They would patrol the surrounding seas in 10 different directions, reporting back any findings in exchange for a steady supply of premium squid meat. They peeled off into the sky, and I retreated to the fire to check the public channel, eventually trading 6 of my surplus grass bundles for a single cup of instant noodles, a rare, processed delicacy. Just as I peeled back the foil, the familiar, raucous chirping returned. I stepped out to find the flock hovering over a point in the water, taking turns kicking at a floating object until I snagged it with my net. It was a bottle of clear, amber liquid labeled vodka in shaky, crooked ink, and my curiosity was immediately tempered by a healthy dose of suspicion. "Shuamu, don't drink that, it might be poisoned. Let me test it for you." The old ice floe beneath me suddenly rumbled, its voice vibrating with an eager, alcoholic buzz. "You can actually drink?" I asked, skeptical. "I'm quite the expert when it comes to spirits," it boasted. "How do you even drink, exactly?" I countered. "Just pour a little on my head, and I'll know if it's the good stuff or a death sentence." I eyed the bottle, deciding that having a sentient, drunkard ice floe act as a chemical sensor was probably the safest strategy in this absurd, hostile world. I gingerly tipped the bottle, letting a tiny, crystalline stream of the clear liquid splash onto the frozen surface beneath my feet. "Great liquor. Wait, no, this stuff is laced with poison. You absolutely cannot consume it, it's death in a bottle. Here, pour it all on me, I'm the only one who can handle the toxins." The old ice floe bellowed, its voice vibrating with a transparently desperate hunger that made me roll my eyes. "Your acting is pathetic and you're a terrible liar," I retorted, shaking the bottle with a dry chuckle. I still had a use for this stuff, and I wasn't about to waste it on a gluttonous, alcoholic piece of ice. "Since I'm in a generous mood, you get exactly one more sip and that is final." I splashed a drop onto its surface, ignoring the incoherent, sputtering complaints that followed, and turned my attention to the task at hand. I scattered the shredded bits of squid I'd prepared across the deck, watching as the entire flock of 10 seabirds descended in a flurry of white wings and frantic, clicking beaks, devouring the reward with enthusiastic squawks before taking to the sky again. With the birds fed and satisfied, I retreated into the cozy, dim confines of my igloo, clutching the precious bottle of vodka, and set to work preparing a feast. I cracked open the instant noodles, dumped the dry, brick-like block into my trusty iron pot, and tossed in the final scraps of squid, intending to craft a gourmet bowl of seafood noodles to take the edge off the freezing reality of this world. Just as I reached for the vodka to splash a bit into the broth to cut through the heavy fishy odor of the brine, the old ice floe began a persistent, whiny muttering again. "Give me one more sip. Just a single, solitary drop. If you let me drink, I swear I'll tell you exactly where the giant shrimp are hiding beneath the surface." I froze, the bottle hovering over the pot. "What giant shrimp? Where exactly are they?" I demanded, my interest piqued. "Let me take a sip first, and then I'll spill the beans," it bargained, clearly trying to hold the information hostage for a buzz. After dealing with the antics of the lively, treasure-loving chest and navigating the treacherous, arrogant ego of the iceberg, I was exhausted, but the prospect of rare food was too good to pass up. I relented, and sure enough, enticed by those few drops of liquid courage, the old ice floe begrudgingly revealed the location of a cache of green shrimp and small fish, which I promptly snagged and hurled into the pot to boil alongside my noodles. As the aroma of the seafood stew began to fill the igloo, I leaned over the floorboards, "You old geezer, how much other food is out there that you've been keeping from me?" I asked, eyeing the ice beneath me suspiciously. But in true form, the flow simply went silent and started playing dead, refusing to acknowledge the question. I sighed, realizing I had finally mastered the secret to managing my companion: control the supply of alcohol, and I controlled the intelligence flow. Once the meal was finished and my hunger was sated, I sprawled out by the warmth of the crackling fire, let the fatigue wash over me for a moment, and then opened the public channel to broadcast my new mission. I was buying all the alcohol I could get my hands on. Since most survivors treated booze as a luxury rather than a necessity, the trades were incredibly favorable for me, and I quickly secured 2 bottles of potent heir in exchange for my last 2 chunks of squid meat. The moment the bottles materialized in my inventory, the ice flow gasped, its surface trembling with excitement. "Erguato, Shumu, don't try to hide that from me. I saw you get it." I leaned back, looking at the bottles with a smug smirk. "So what if you did? Pour me a taste. Just a bottle cap's worth, I'm begging you." "Cut the crap," I interrupted, setting a new set of ground rules. "From now on, this is your salary, not your hobby. You help me locate resources in the deep, and for every item you find, you get half a bottle cap, that's the deal." The flow grumbled, its voice full of dramatic indignation. "That's practically slave labor. That's way too little." But despite the theatrics and the endless, pathetic complaining, it immediately began shifting its currents and scanning the depths, obediently setting out to hunt for whatever I needed next. The peace of the night was shattered by the old ice flow's sudden, hysterical vibration, a sound akin to grinding tectonic plates as it shrieked, "Shuemu, I found something and it's big." I had my fishing net in hand, my muscles coiled and ready to vault out of the igloo for the next harvest, but the flow's tone shifted from greedy to genuinely terrified. "It's a massive ship, right behind us, bearing down fast." A ship in this desolate, frozen purgatory made my mind immediately jump to the chilling rumors of the legendary ghost ship that haunted these waters. Doubts gnawing at my gut, I stepped out into the biting, frigid air, and there it was, a gargantuan, hulking silhouette cutting through the pitch-black horizon, its lights blazing with a dazzling, almost hypnotic brilliance against the void. It was still miles away, but the sheer scale of the vessel sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the wind. The old ice flow, ever the opportunist, immediately began angling for a reward. "I helped you spot a literal cruise ship. Surely that earns me at least 2 full bottle caps, right?" I snorted, not taking my eyes off the looming light. "That doesn't count for anything unless you can actually get me on board, and if you manage that, I'll give you the entire supply." The flow grumbled, sounding like a disgruntled old drunkard. "You brat, always making empty promises. If I had the power to steer this entire flow like a luxury liner, the first thing I'd do is toss you into the abyss." Despite the bravado, the flow began offering up increasingly absurd tactics, from suggesting I scavenge a high-powered engine from the middle of the ocean to proposing I wrangle a dozen sea turtles to tow us, neither of which were remotely practical. As we bickered, the ship drew closer, and I could just barely make out shifting silhouettes on the deck, human or spectral. I couldn't tell, but before the mystery could deepen, the vessel abruptly flickered, shuddered like a dying lantern, and dissolved into nothingness, leaving the sea unnervingly empty and silent. "Holy crap," I whispered, the adrenaline slowly leaving my limbs. Had I not heard the rumors, I would have assumed I was finally succumbing to madness. Returning to the igloo, I sought answers on the public channel, but the chat was already a firestorm. A player had just broadcasted the contents of a message in a bottle detailing the mythical magical rainbow ice block, and in the ensuing panic, my own secret monopoly on magic ice crystals had been exposed to the entire server. Private messages flooded my interface, a mixture of desperate inquiries and extortionate price gouging that made my head spin, effectively killing any chance of acquiring crystals at a reasonable rate. Frustrated and exhausted, I surrendered to sleep, only to be jolted upright in the dead of night by the ice flow's piercing, frantic scream. "Shuemu, wake up, you idiot, they've come for revenge." I lunged for my spiked meteor hammer and burst outside, scanning the horizon, but the ice flow was empty. "You're drunk, you useless piece of slush. There's nothing here," I growled, but the flow wasn't having it. "They're below us. The squid's family is back to tear us apart." It paused, its vibration shifting into a new, erratic frequency. "Wait, no, it's a squad of turtles. They're carrying stone tablets. Turtles carrying treasure chests." My annoyance vanished, replaced by a surge of predatory greed. If the squids were bringing reinforcements, I was about to have a very profitable morning. But the excitement turned to alarm as the flow let out a high-pitched, piercing wail. The treasure chests beneath the water were using their latches to grip jagged, long spears, driving them upward to pierce my very foundation. Before I could even reach the edge to defend my home, a long, iron-tipped spear burst through the ice like a shark's fin, and with a series of thunderous, bone-shaking crashes, over a dozen massive sea turtles hauled themselves onto the flow, each one bearing a heavily fortified treasure chest on its back, a phalanx of armored chaos that left me utterly stunned at the sheer tactical insanity of the assault. The chaos was absolute as the phalanx of armored shells surged toward me, their surfaces gleaming under the moonlight as they bellowed, "For the glory of the treasure chest knights, charge." I felt a surge of grim amusement amidst the tension. So, a dozen sentient containers with delusions of grandeur, thought they could storm my home and demand vengeance. I didn't waste a second on diplomacy, my fingers tightening around the cold, textured grip of my spiked meteor hammer as I met their vanguard with a brutal, physics-defying swing. The impact was visceral, a deafening crack echoed across the ice as my hammer shattered the lead chest's long spear and sent the entire unit spiraling backward, its shell denting under the force of the strike. But the sight of their comrade falling only seemed to incite the rest into a mindless, clattering frenzy. They swarmed forward like a tide of polished mahogany and brass, their mechanical movements erratic and relentless, forcing me into a desperate fighting retreat. Though individual chests were little more than nuisances, the sheer mass of them pushing against me made it impossible to hold the line, and I found myself backed against the threshold of my igloo, my breath hitching in the freezing air. Just as I prepared to swing again, a frantic tremor vibrated through the foundation beneath my boots. The old ice floe was screaming, "Water! You idiot! Use the water! Splash them before they freeze solid, or rather, freeze them yourself." I didn't question the logic. I pivoted, vaulted into the igloo, and snatched up the iron bucket filled with fresh, meltwater, swinging it in a wide, desperate arc as I lunged back outside. The liquid drenched the forward line of the squad, and the reaction was instantaneous. The sub-zero air did the rest, as a symphony of sharp, crystalline snapping sounds filled the night. Thick rime and ice encased the frontline chests, locking their hinges and limbs in a vice of solid frost. "Oh no, the vanguard is frozen solid. Fall back." One of the survivors screeched, and the remaining chests frantically steered their turtles, diving off the edge of the floe in a clumsy, panicked retreat. I didn't let them escape entirely, lunging for my net and racing to the precipice, where I managed to snag one massive, lumbering turtle by its shell. It was gargantuan, a heavy, calcified weight that strained every muscle in my arms as I struggled to haul it onto the ice. "Wait, don't let me drown. I've been caught," the creature wheezed, while its brethren fled into the black depths without so much as a backward glance. I looked the captured turtle in the eye, my voice firm. "Submit to me, and you'll work for your keep, 3 meals a day, meat, fish, the works, an all-you-can-eat contract." The turtle didn't hesitate, its greed overriding its survival instinct. "Deal," it barked, immediately flipping its bulk over and heaving itself onto the ice floe with a heavy thud. "When's dinner?" it asked, and I couldn't help but gape at its audacity. "You really don't have a sense of shame, do you?" I rejected its demand for immediate service, setting the ground rules. Labor comes before luxury. While the turtle grumbled, I moved to the frozen, immobile chests and cracked them open one by one, liberating a hoard of basic materials: a single tire, 10 seemingly useless balloons, and one small, silver-scaled sea fish. As I stood there, lost in thought while contemplating the utility of a tire and balloons in the middle of a frozen ocean, I turned back to find the turtle had snatched up the small fish and gulped it down in a single, dismissive motion. I was so utterly speechless at its gluttony that I could only stare, my anger momentarily stifled by sheer disbelief. I shoved the supplies into my pack, and once the deck was cleared, I secured the turtle with a length of steel cable, shoving it off the side of the floe to serve as my new engine. It was a master of performance art, I quickly realized. It would paddle with frantic, theatrical intensity, legs kicking the water to a froth, yet the cable remained completely slack, proving the creature was putting on a show of effort while drifting lazily through the wake. I stared down at the turtle, watching its eyes shift with a shifty, calculating light that would have made a professional con artist proud. The creature was clearly a master of the theatrical lie, paddling with just enough effort to make the water bubble while the steel cable remained as limp as a piece of damp string. "I've seen enough," I stated, my voice dropping to a cold, flat register as I drew my knife, the blade catching a flicker of firelight. "I'm done with this performance art. I've decided to skip the labor and go straight to the soup today. I'm dining on turtle." The old ice floe chimed in with a rhythmic, drunken rumble. "Yeah, you whip up a nice turtle stew, and I'll reward myself with the rest of that erguado." The turtle's demeanor shifted from arrogant indifference to pure, frantic terror in a heartbeat, its flippers slapping against the ice as it scrambled backward. "Wait, don't be hasty. I can be productive. I'll hunt for you. I'll catch enough to feed us both, I swear. I'll only keep 5 for myself a day and give the rest to you." I looked down at the creature with a raised eyebrow, my skepticism radiating in waves. "Liar. I've been out here long enough to know the local yield. I haven't even seen that many fish in a single day, let alone enough for a tax-paying turtle." The creature desperately waved a flipper. "It's true. The shoals are deeper than you think. Just loosen the cable, let me expand my search radius, and I'll prove it." I weighed the threat of starvation against the irritation of keeping a lying turtle, ultimately deciding it deserved one final chance before it became my next meal. I quickly crafted several more lengths of cable, braiding them together into a long, sturdy tether that I lashed securely to the turtle's shell, then gave it a decisive kick back into the freezing water. It didn't take long for the creature to return, triumphantly surfacing with a fish in its maw, but my anticipation turned to immediate disgust as it spit the offering onto the ice, a mangled, headless corpse of a fish, half-chewed and dripping with saliva. My appetite vanished. I couldn't stomach the thought of eating something that had served as a turtle's appetizer, so I shoved the carcass aside to save for bait or trade. The turtle, clearly missing the mark, tried again, surfacing this time with a palm-sized squid that was missing all but 3 of its tentacles. I was so utterly speechless at the creature's definition of catching that I could only point toward the water, ordering the old ice floe to monitor its progress like a hawk while I retreated into the warmth of my igloo to thaw my frozen nerves by the fire. Over an hour later, the distinct, grinding sound of ice blocks colliding echoed from the distance, and iceberg's debris trail was drifting into our sector. I raced to the edge, seeing the massive, shimmering blocks bobbing in the current. "Hey you! Push them over to me now!" I shouted, only to hear a muffled, gluttonous mumble from the depths. "What for? I'm busy catching snacks," I snarled. "Stop playing dumb. Push this batch over or the stew pot gets a new ingredient." Sensing my resolve, the turtle reluctantly swam over, its movements sluggish but obedient as it shoved the haul toward my base. It was a chore, but as I began breaking down the ice, the haul proved worth it. A mountain of basic materials, a heap of rich, dark soil, and to my absolute delight a frozen watermelon. I let the turtle return to its hunting while I processed the haul, realizing that while I could never stomach food that had been subjected to the turtle's mouth, the half-eaten pieces were still technically calories in this brutal world. I opened the public channel, my fingers flying across the interface as I typed. Selling food. Beautiful prices. First come, first served. As soon as the listings hit the trade portal, the channel exploded with activity, survivors were starving, and even damaged. Turtle-mauled seafood was a luxury compared to the constant threat of hunger. Notifications for successful trades began to ping in a relentless, rhythmic stream, my inventory swelling with essential materials as I successfully monetized the turtle's incompetence, turning a lazy, conniving creature into a surprisingly efficient engine of trade. The old sea turtle was proving to be a master of the double cross, a creature whose concept of an honest day's labor involved more theft than productivity, specifically the infuriating habit of gnawing half the flesh off every single fish it managed to snag before bringing it to the surface. It was a blatant display of gluttony that set my teeth on edge, and rather than engage in a futile battle of wits, I decided to play the market to my advantage. I listed every mangled, half-eaten catch it brought back directly onto the trade channel. Despite the inevitable chorus of complaints and whining from the buyers in the public channel, the sheer desperation of this frozen hellscape meant that even tattered, partially consumed seafood was a commodity in high demand, especially at the rock-bottom prices I set. I watched the inventory clear out with a smirk, feeling little remorse for the poor souls who ended up with the scraps. If someone chose to buy a half-eaten fish at a discount, that was their own stroke of misfortune to bear. To keep myself from starving on the turtle's incompetence, I bartered some surplus materials for 2 pristine, intact small sea fish, which I placed onto my iron grill, the sizzle of the fat against the hot metal offering a sweet, smoky respite from the unrelenting, biting cold of the sea air. Just as the aroma began to peak, the old sea turtle surfaced, its head poking through the dark, icy chop with a look of practiced exhaustion. "I'm spent, boss," it wheezed, its voice thick with a pathetic, manufactured fatigue. "I've been working my fins to the bone out there. I need a hot, fresh meal to keep my strength up." I looked at it with a flat, unimpressed stare, holding a skewer over the fire. "You skimmed more off the top today than I've actually seen in my pack, and you still have the unmitigated gall to beg for my rations. Get lost and catch 2 decent, whole fish for yourself if you're so hungry." To my surprise, it didn't argue, simply offering an eager, compliant nod before flipping its massive shell and diving back into the abyss with a splash that sent shards of ice spraying across the deck. I leaned back, watching the ripples dissipate, a flicker of suspicion crossing my mind. If it were truly as exhausted as it claimed, how did it have the energy to dive so deep and hunt so efficiently? I mused, realizing the creature was far more energetic than it led me to believe. Its previous display of lethargy just another layer of its con. I sat in the silence for a while, the crackling of the grill the only sound in the vast, frozen expanse, until a series of wet, rhythmic thuds against the side of the floe broke my concentration. A few minutes later, the distinct sound of heavy, ragged panting echoed from the water's edge, followed by the turtle's muffled, triumphant announcement, "I'm back. Quit stalling and throw those on the grill for me."